Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all those who are attending our May webinar. This webinar is Beyond the Firewall, and I'm your host, Brad Butlick, along with Mark Cooper, who's the president and founder of PKI Solutions. And just before we start, this is a particular topic that's been near and dear to my heart for a long time. If you've ever seen any of the presentations I've done when I was with the hardware security module space, I think firewalls are kind of abused, and they're not the end-all, be-all. And Mark is going to go through the exact reasons why that's probably a very true statement, right, Mark?
Absolutely. This is one that you and I talk about regularly, and we hear a lot of customers kind of lamenting about this issue. So I'm glad that we're taking the time to get to this. And I'll be curious to see what some of our attendees have to say as well.
That's great. And so we can kind of move into the next couple of, there we go. That's me, the director of sales here over at PKI Solutions. Like I said, Mark Cooper is the president and founder of the company. Both of us, I mean, combined, we probably have 50 years of experience in this particular space on the crypto side. So I'm going to pass this over to Mark, and I'm going to, as usual, provide some color commentary every now and again. And so take it away, Mark.
Great. No, Brad, as you kind of said at the top, this is a topic that I know you and I talk about quite a bit. And a lot of our customers, when they kind of go into their strategic approach to cybersecurity, as well as their identity system, a lot of times internally, customers are struggling with how they're allocating budgets, where they're spending their dollars, who gets the bigger lion's share of the budget, whether it's identity systems, it's firewalls. So it tends to be a lot of internal conversations. But today we're going to talk a little bit about kind of this bias when it comes to how organizations are spending dollars and why that happens. Talk a little bit about the dependencies of these firewalls. If they're getting all this attention, what's not getting the attention as it relates to firewalls, so that identity teams, certificate teams can kind of have conversations with those firewall teams, as well as stakeholders, about what they may be missing in that approach, and talk about some of the specific examples we've seen at some of our customers from kind of this short-sighted approach. And if we have time, we'll try to get to a Q&A. So let's jump in and kind of talk a little bit about this budget bias. And we actually have a poll that I'm going to go ahead and open up just to ask about, do you know how much of your budget is actually getting allocated to the firewall? So no, I think one of the things that we find quite a bit for most organizations is when you start talking to the CISO or other budget owners about where do they spend their dollars. If you even talk to systems integrators and resellers, where's their focus? It's the firewall. And I think this is really because it's kind of the OG of cybersecurity. Before there was anything else, there was a firewall. I remember back in the 90s when I worked at Nike, there was one connection to the internet, and they used a bastion host. There wasn't a firewall quite yet because there was nothing else connected to it. It was essentially a firewall, was the bastion host, because nothing else was allowed to talk to the internet.
I'll go one step further. It's the whole wall concept.
Yeah,
I mean, we've been building walls around our assets since the dawn of time.
Yeah,
I mean, it's the way things go. I mean, it's in our DNA for probably 4,000 or 5,000 years of human existence. In order to protect your crown jewels, you build a wall.
Make a moat. Yeah, you put some alligators in there. You set it on fire. It's an easy thing to point to, and there's certainly nothing wrong with firewalls. In some ways, it's table stakes, right? No one would think about setting up an environment without some type of routing and firewall and permission-based approach. But the problem is a lot of times this is seen as the only way of solving the problem. If I put in enough firewalls, if I sell enough firewalls, if I buy enough firewalls, I'm secure. I
think another thing, Mark, is that it's really easy to talk to your CFO about requiring more money for a firewall. I mean, it's one of the few things within an IT department that does what it says. I mean, I give a lot of credit to the companies that came up with this whole concept of a firewall. It does what it says. It's not like you go to somebody and say, I need an encryption solution that's AES 256-bit. I mean, that doesn't have the same ring to it as Firewall. So
Yeah.
it's a lot easier to get funding for that than something else.
Yeah, absolutely. And the interesting thing is the modern approach that we're kind of finding in a lot of places, this concept of posture management, for instance, just visibility across our identity systems, our cyber systems. One of the challenges, honestly, is a lot of these firewalls tend to be a set and forget. Set up some rules, put it out there. There often isn't much visibility of how they're performing and all the ancillary things. So, a lot of times firewalls have dependencies on PKI certificates, and we'll dig into that a little bit more. But that dependency, when that dependency fails, the firewall is impaired. But there isn't as much attention paid to that foundational thing like certificates and PKI, even though when they don't have the visibility and they're not secure, the firewall is going to have issues. And that's kind of what's driving a lot of these things. It's the old adage of building a fancy house on a really weak foundation. If you haven't put the right systems and controls into place underneath, your firewall isn't going to be as secure as it needs to be. And that's a little bit of the problem is the original firewalls were very simple things. Let this port in, let this application out, let this communication do this thing. Then as we got more and more intelligence and more capabilities, it had more dependencies. Do I really know what's happening inside of a TLS connection? Do I know what node's talking to what node? Well, those dependencies, if they break, the firewall can't do what it's designed to do. And the approach of a firewall first or firewall only kind of runs opposite of what a lot of organizations think about now of zero trust, meaning I should assume that anything in my network is inherently untrustworthy. The firewall is one barrier. Absolutely, you should define that. But you should assume that anywhere within your network, how can I make sure that communications can be secure and that organizations are able to send details from one system to the other, even if an adversary is there. Years ago, I heard this great analogy of a firewall-only approach or a firewall forward is a lot like a Twinkie. And I don't know how well this translates, but I think Twinkies are pretty universal from the Hostess dessert. But the Twinkie is this outside sponge with a little bit of cream filling on the inside. But the firewall only approach or a firewall forward approach results in this. I have a really protective coating on the outside, but then my entire internal network is a lot like that cream filling. It's easy. There's no protection against it. Once you breach the exterior point, if you don't have the right controls in place, the inside is vulnerable. When we start thinking about the dependencies for the firewall, if they break, the firewall can't protect that exterior. And if we don't have defense in depth, then we're opening up those internal systems and potentially don't have the right controls in place.
And I think, Mark, firewalls and the use of firewalls, a lot like PKI. PKI, if it's operating properly for the business unit, no one knows it's there. Same thing with the firewall. If it's operating properly, no one knows it's there. But how do you know that it's secure? That's the big question that you have. I mean, if you can't get to some location, the firewall's not working. If you can't get a certificate, the PKI is not working. But if you're getting the certificate and you're getting to a destination, it doesn't mean that it's being secure. It does mean potential that the bad actors are making their way through, just like your irregular actors are.
Exactly. And one of the things that we see is some of these advanced use cases for firewalls. When we start thinking about how they depend on certificates, some organizations will use certificates to authenticate to their firewalls, whether they're doing mutual TLS connections for say a VPN or doing TLS inspection. And this is a really interesting thing when you start thinking about TLS inspection. Is what most of this is doing is looking for compliance of what information is being allowed to be sent outside of the organization. Most firewalls are easily capable of inspecting inbound TLS because they'll terminate it and they'll do something to an internal host. But the outbound TLS requires a little special repurposing of PKI capabilities. They don't do anything inherently wrong, but they're a little sneaky. But it creates a dependency on the internal PKI. when that TLS inspection can't occur, that traffic can no longer be inspected. You have lost that visibility. The problem is if I'm an adversary, if I can find a way to cause a problem within your PKI, I can cause a problem with TLS inspection. If I can start doing things like interrupting the availability of your CRL or revocation checking, it's essentially a denial of service in that I don't have to compromise your firewall cert, but I can find a way to prevent it from getting to the CRL or prevent internal systems from accessing a revocation list. Then that means they're not going to trust the certificates that the firewall is using to do TLS inspection. And then I can start sending data out and it can't be inspected. That is a great way of circumventing protections from a firewall and from the PKI without much more than some network redirect or maybe DNS spoofing. There's a whole host of things I can do without trying to break the crypto. That if you don't have the visibility of what's happening within the PKI, you wouldn't know, oh, we have issues with revocation checking. If I don't have visibility to the firewall, I don't necessarily know that my TLS inspection is broken. When we get to things like VPN tunnels, same thing. These certificate-driven capabilities of the firewall oftentimes are just assumed to work because there's a PKI and I bought a firewall. I guess I can do these things and here we go. But if the PKI isn't resilient, if it's not secure, that's that foundational layer that's enabling the stuff up above. And Brad, we see this quite a bit when we talk to customers of outages, issues that they've had with certificates that ultimately affect firewalls, affect VPNs, and more.
Well, that's because more and more systems are starting to rely on security power that is afforded by a PKI and by certificate.
Yeah.
And that's why that's happening.
Yeah. Interesting. So the poll results that we had on what percentage of budget is allocated to firewalls, over half of the respondents said, I don't know, or it's not broken out that way in our budget. Then we had about a quarter of the respondents saying between 25 and 50% of their budget is allocated to firewalls.
Yeah.
So not really smart. No one said more than 50%. So that's a promising thing. But it's definitely a big.
If you talk to any of your resellers that are out there and ask them what products they sell the most of, they will come back and tell you it's firewalls.
Yeah.
And because I've done this, I've done that for years. I've said, so what's the most popular product you sell? And it's always comes back to those firewalls, and it's easy. And it's not necessarily a reseller's fault. It's because the company says, hey, can you sell me this new firewall? And it's like the reseller's like, sure, no problem.
Yeah. I'm going to open up this next poll. It's how often do you audit review certificates used by your firewall? So as you start thinking about how these different use cases are enabled by certificates, how much visibility do you have about what's going on? So some of the things that can go wrong when we start thinking about firewalls and certificates, the certificates that get placed onto the firewalls themselves for mutual TLS or to do TLS inspection, TLS termination. We also see issues with expired CRLs and OCSP. Those simple revocation things. This isn't security related, but the resilience is what ultimately affects the ability for a CRL to get published. And it tends to be one of those things that when a problem happens, it takes a long time to get to the root cause. And I know a recent conversation we had with a customer where I said, oh, that problem you had with your VPN. They said, we had a problem with our VPN. Turned out we had a problem with our firewall. And it was because our CRL expired. But it only took us 30 minutes to fix. And go, wait a second, let's back up. It took you 30 minutes to fix once you knew what the problem was, which was the expired CRL. How long did it take before that first VPN user had a problem, called the help desk, then the help desk started troubleshooting, then someone else called in, they opened up a ticket, suddenly the help desk goes, oh, something's wrong, it's the VPN system, let's start reaching it. It took many, many hours before the teams finally worked out, it's not the firewall, it's not the VPN, maybe it's the PKI, oh, it's the CRL, then the time to go fix it. So these problems really kind of wind up affecting organizations on a drastic basis from an impact to productivity. We also see issues, with templates. A lot of times, what manufacturers, whether it's Cisco, Palo Alto, or anyone else, they come out with documentation of, hey, here's how to enable this feature, here's how to allow this type of capability, and they wind up having organizations creating templates or certificates that are weak or are prone to vulnerabilities because they simply started clicking boxes, turning on features that enabled their product, but inevitably left something that was very insecure behind. And these can kind of lead to issues. I've seen companies with documentation to enable their product that allowed or had the customer create certificate templates that were so open that someone could come in and do a lateral escalation through them. And one of them was a template where they had users enrolling for certificates with no application policy restrictions, which means they could do anything. Users that were getting certificates to do this VPN connection, the VPN connection worked. Why did it work? Because the certificate they got had no restriction, which means it's good for anything. But guess what else they could do? Everything they wanted. So the product worked, the VPN worked, the documentation was written to get that product working with that much subject matter expertise. So we see a lot of times security vulnerabilities in that inner core. Had nothing to do with the firewall, but guess what? The firewall team that got all of that budget and followed documentation wind up allowing this giant lateral escalation issue within the environment itself.
Well, that's kind of the big problem is I think a lot of times people implement these security solutions and they think just by implementing them, they're secure. And it gives you that false sense of security. It's kind of like, putting that fence around your pool, but leaving the gate open. You've put the fence around, but you haven't really kind of fully secured it.
Yep. So from the poll we just closed out, we kind of tied on how often do you audit review. About a third of people said occasionally during incidents or manual checks, so nothing regularly. One said regularly through automated or scheduled audits. And the other third said not sure. Another team handles that. So an interesting thing when you think about if the teams here are primarily focused on identity and PKI, but they don't have much visibility of where their certificates wind up, there could be some upstream issues driven by decisions within the PKI itself. So some of the things that we've seen in customers, I talked a little bit about the VPN failure, a simple certificate that failed. Every organization has had certificates that have failed. There's reasons why there's things like certificate lifecycle management out there. But this is one where a firewall that was providing VPN capabilities had a certificate, there's no visibility. The firewall was bought and paid for. It's not like the firewall itself broke down, but because the certificate was no longer valid, that function, that VPN function, no longer worked. And for this particular customer, it affected hundreds, if not thousands, of their employees. And that can be a significant impact to an organization. We've seen repeatedly issues with things like TLS inspection. And more often than not, it's not from the certificate on the firewall expiring. It's the fact that the internal client systems that have to trust and validate the certificates that are being created for TLS inspection are unable to get the revocation information. For organizations that don't have reliability or resilience within their PKI, that is going to affect the timeliness of certificates. And when we think about VPN connections, these things can be heavily influenced in the morning where all the employees connect to the VPN and they may stay connected for 8 hours. There's not a lot of ongoing revocation checking that happens through the day. And in fact, in most VPN scenarios, the client systems don't do any certificate validation. It's all on the VPN concentrator or firewall. But when we're doing outbound TLS, web browsers are constantly checking certificates and constantly checking revocation information. And depending on how the PKI is set up, that can be something that all throughout the day has a high dependency on revocation verification. And if there's a hiccup within the PKI and we can't publish that CRL, we wind up in a case where productivity is impacted, outbound traffic is impacted, and more often than not, it's not a malicious actor. While a malicious actor could certainly create a denial of service, more often than not, this is an operational issue. Someone forgot to publish the root CRL. The online CA had a hiccup and couldn't talk to HSM, and as a result, couldn't publish the CRL. All of these, at the end of the day, are all about visibility. Is most organizations don't know that there's a problem from a security aspect, from a resilience factor, until they've encountered an outage. We call this reactive management. You wait till there's a fire, something's broken. Okay, where is it? What is it? How many hours is it going to take me to fix? And remember, it's not the quick 30-minute, I just need to publish a new CRL. It's the hours and hours it took there. That's a really expensive way to run the organization. So even if you're looking at this as, I'm not afraid of nation state attackers, I'm not afraid of someone hacking into my environment. Being in a reactive state of my firewall is critical, it's getting all the attention, it's getting all this budget. And when a function breaks, I'm just gonna wait to respond to it. It's really expensive to do that because you're getting pulled off of other projects. All of the employees, all of the processes that are affected cost your business, whether that is from productivity, whether it's reputation impact. Some customers have SLA issues and have contractual dollars that they're owed. Not having visibility of this foundation and making sure that PKI is secure. We like to talk about this because if all the attention's going to the firewall and there's not enough people talking about, hey, here's the real impacts that are happening at the PKI level, then you're going to continue to have challenges with the firewall. But guess what? You're spending money whether you realize it or not, being reactive to your PKI. So what are some of the things that we recommend that you can do? One is to start figuring out what certificates you have that are doing these critical things within your firewalls. Do you know what certificates have been issued to firewalls? What applications within those firewalls? You know, what drives the TLS inspection? What drives the VPN? What's your mutual authentication? So you know what those critical systems are. With that basic audit, you have a little more visibility in a conversation you can have with the team. It also gives you the ability to start having a conversation with them so you can figure out, you know, if you've got concerns about the firewall security or that's a visibility you don't have, you can at least start to have that conversation base. We also know that you can start employing hardened templates within your PKI that are for very specific purposes. So make sure that the certificates that are going for TLS inspection, those only need things like server authentication. They don't need other types of application policies or EKUs. Certificates that are getting issued for VPN authentication, make sure you understand what those are. So even though these firewalls may be in a different group getting a different budget, there is a role for PKI and identity access management to make sure that they're getting the right things in the right places. The other thing is obviously getting visibility. What's happening within the firewall, but also what's happening with those foundational things underneath. Are you getting visibility from a resilience and security perspective? And then just thinking about visibility, whether it's PKI or other foundational things, there's a lot of attention coming to things like DNS and DNSSEC, the public internet space. But this funding of visibility and posture management is really designed to drive awareness and get you out of this reactive IT mode of waiting until something's broken and then going to fix it. You may think that you're not spending dollars to maintain something, but you are, and it's probably costing you a whole lot more than you really think about that. So, you know, kind of to summarize all of this, there's a couple of things we think. Obviously, there's a lot of budgets that are going to things like firewalls. They're easy to fund, they're easy to understand, they're definitely part of the landscape, but we think that the conversations within organizations should be, how do you balance that? How do we make sure that organizations are investing in cyber controls throughout the organization and throughout the deaths as you kind of drive to that zero trust. Also making sure that groups and stakeholders understand that it's just not a matter of buying a firewall. Those firewalls are going to have dependencies on PKIs. And if you own the PKI, if you're the identity access person, making sure that those other teams know that they have dependencies on what you had may make it easier to attach budgets or make sure that you're getting that visibility that you need. Also driving that messaging, typically when the PKI breaks, it's going to generally break at least some functionality within the firewall, whether that's VPN, TLS inspection. There's an inherent connection with most firewalls that are there. The other one is making sure you don't wind up in a state of what happens if I do have a certificate failure. Do I inadvertently wind up in a fail open state? How much testing is happening and being done with these firewalls that, for instance, if I have a certificate failure, does my TLS inspection block all outgoing TLS, or does it let it go and I don't get anything? What about my VPN? If I have a VPN certificate failure, what happens? Does it fail open? Does it use expired credentials? Having an understanding about what happens when these failures happen, because believe me, just because something uses certificates, the developer that implemented that capability on that firewall may have chosen to interpret different parts of the RFC different ways, and they may behave very differently. I haven't necessarily seen a firewall crash and blue screen because of an expired certificate, but it's not unheard of to say the RFC said you should do this, and it did something very different. So thinking about investing in that foundational thing like PKIs, and obviously we're a big advocate of PKI, but we know it drives a lot of other business processes. So we're hoping that this conversation gives some credibility around it's not just an investment in firewalls, it's really investment across the cyber spectrum.
Yeah, I think it's
what would you add here?
It's a lot of people look at a firewall and they say if I make it bigger, stronger, faster, more thicker, there's a law of diminishing returns in anything that you can buy. And I think in many cases, we're not suggesting for a second that you eliminate firewalls. Not at all. No. Yep. We're suggesting that you don't rely upon them as the major form of your security. And yep. You actually do some more investigation into that and other systems that protect the firewall and protect the internal systems, such as PKI. So that's the recommendation.
Yeah, a great case. Victor put into the chat here that a lot of systems still use self-signed certificates for TLS inspection. A lot of them are SHA-1. So that firewall that's the latest and greatest and it's getting all the budget, and you turn on the SHA-1 or you turn on TLS and you don't give it its own certificate, it's going to create its own self-signed certificate, possibly SHA-1, and then tell you, hey, give this to all your clients so that I can do TLS inspection. That's not a great security thing. And that's supposed to be the end all be all that organizations are invested in. So if you're not really paying attention to the certificates and the interactions with firewall, they're intrinsic. PKI can't replace the firewall. Firewall can't replace the PKI. They work hand in hand. But a lot of times the PKI is a secondary assumed thing that's there. It's great that these capabilities are built in, but definitely goes back to the point that you can't assume that foundational technology is going to be secure, and whatever the firewall manufacturer does is going to be right. Most of the bad documentation I've ever found over the years comes from firewalls, and it's usually not a pretty thing.
So we're coming up with a thing. So don't be lulled into this false sense of security when it comes to these types of things. Yep. So one of the things that I want to announce is next month's webinar. And by the way, thank you very much, Mark, for your wealth of knowledge on this. It's always amazing to hear the information that you have and helping organizations make their systems much more secure. But next month, we're going to do something that's actually very interesting. We're having the session is going to be ADCS changes in 2025, what matters and how to prepare. Now, this is to all the people that think that Microsoft PKI is going away. Microsoft is investing a serious amount of time and money into the PKI. I mean, we work within the PKI space, and probably 85% of the market for PKI is Microsoft PKI. So Microsoft is dedicated to this technology, and they're now really starting to showcase that they are dedicated to it. And we're going to talk about it next month. You want to add anything to that, Mark?
Yeah, I had the pleasure of having a meeting with Tanya Ya, who is the new product manager at Microsoft for ADCS, and she's very enthusiastic. She's got a lot of plans. We've offered to help facilitate that. So our June is going to kind of cover some of the new capabilities like post-quantum that's been announced, CRL partitioning, the database changes, as well as audit changes. And hopefully we'll have Tanya on in the near future just to do a fireside chat about ADCS and what's coming down from the team. So really excited about next month and continued conversations there.
Great. Well, thank you all for attending this webinar, and hopefully we'll see you next month. And if you ever need anything, please feel free to reach out to us.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much.